welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 19, Episode 20. Coming up on this show, we've got time window technology, the renaissance of psychedelic research, and reincarnating as a fat pig. I'm Benjamin Grundy, joining me is Aaron Wright.
As enthralling as I'm sure that story is, I just love it that today I'm there typing away, doing my work, and you send me this picture of a Chinese woman, and you say to me, this is the most incredible reincarnation story we've ever covered. I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. And you say, I'll send you her previous incarnation. You sent me a picture of a bird.
Yeah, she was an eagle in her past life.
How do you even recall that?
She remembers everything. She remembers laying eggs, giving birth to over 100 chicks. She remembers her strong eagle claws.
Well, I have to ask. So we know from a lot of reincarnation stories that sometimes those attributes of a previous incarnation comes into the new one, right? So obviously when you're going from human to human, it's personality traits. But now as a human, what does she still lay eggs? What does she do?
The Chinese researcher who followed up on this case, he went to give her a handshake when he first met her, and she's in her 70s. And he said it was like getting crushed by an eagle claw. Like, she had this grip that it was like a vice.
I was waiting for you to say that she jumped on top of him, pecked him to death.
No, but she has all these strange attributes. Like she loves the taste of rotting meat. Like she prefers meat that's been sitting out for a while, which she prefers from her life as an eagle. And he actually tested her sight. And she has incredibly sharp vision. She has the vision of an eagle. It's quite incredible. This is coming up in a book. I hope I have time to fit this in. This is from 100 incarnation cases in Pingyang. Extraordinary true cases of the Kan people who recall past lives. And it's a very specific region. I think it's in Guangzhou. And it's an ethnic group in China. And they have this kind of oral tradition of reincarnation, and it's all part of their history. But it seems as though there's a lot of cases focused in this area because the reincarnations seem to stay in this area. It's not like they're reincarnating all over China.
Well,
they're just staying in this local region.
Well, you hear as a whole generally from reincarnation stories, especially the ones that come out of India, which is a good example, is that when people reincarnate, they tend to reincarnate around the same groups of people. So it would make sense that you have that going on. But the thing is, I mean, people could just say, well, it's a cultural thing. That is, culturally, they believe in reincarnation. But from what you were telling me, there's a whole heap of physical evidence that seems to come through.
This area has tons of those cases where if it's an accidental death or, you know, some kind of unfortunate murder maybe, there will be a birthmark that corresponds to the death of the previous incarnation.
Oh, great. Yeah, this is Ian Tucker kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Stevenson. Stevenson actually. Details of who he is. It's his name, what clan he's from.
In a texter or something.
Yeah, she just uses a marker and writes on his arm. And soon after, a child is born with this birthmark on the inside of his arm that you can't tell that it's writing. It doesn't look like writing.
No.
But it's exactly where she's left that mark on the death of her son.
Yeah.
And he has memories of being that person.
Yeah, that's really crazy. In fact, if I can find that image, I'll put that in the show notes because that's just really compelling. I mean, yes, it's a birthmark, but the coincidence is uncanny.
And for the first time, I've seen cases from this book where it's detailed there's reincarnations into infants who have already been born.
Oh, this is like that whole idea of walk-ins.
Yeah.
That's a big... Is it implying that something else has been pushed out?
It's too weird. I have to explain it later.
All right. Well, then we'll get into that in a moment. In our whole extension towards the end of the show, I've just got the most crazy of stories coming up. So recently I've been looking into some of this idea about interdimensional rifts and that kind of stuff. We've been talking about it on the show, and I happened to come across some stories from Uluru, which of course, you know, Ayers Rock, that massive location in the centre of Australia, a beautiful location, but also it has...
holy location.
Well, it is a holy location. It's a very spiritual location. But when I started looking into some of the details behind it, it turns out that it's kind of been, I wouldn't say blown out of proportion, but people But so tourists go up there, and in the last 40 years or so, 35 people have died climbing up Uluru from heart attacks.
Pretty damn steep too.
It's very, very steep, and so they put in this railing, which of course, destroys, the natural look of the site, and of course, the spirituality of the site as well. But this park ranger, who's an Indigenous person, said, well, yes, the spiritualism is really important, but it's the German tourists. And I'm thinking, well, hang on, we've said on the show
Why
before.
German tourists?
Apparently they're pooping up there.
Why only German
I don't
tourists?
know. I don't know why he said that, but I think, well, that stands to reason, because as we know, who gets taken by crocodiles in Australia? It's always the German tourists. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, that stands to reason.
I can't hold it any longer, Gunther. Oh, you'll just let it go, Fritz. Let it go.
That's
That's every day. Every day on Ezra.
The problem is because they're pooping up there. I'm sure it's not just German tourists. I think that was just an anecdote that was thrown in by this guy. But I think what's happening, because they're pooping up there, when it rains, it's getting down. It all comes down the side. All the bacteria in it, it's wrecking the local ecosystem. It's causing huge amounts of problem. But from a paranormal kind of point of view, there's a whole heap of paranormal phenomena that's attached to that, which connects back to other locations across Australia.
Hang on a second. You're tying in your plus segment coming up to German tourists shitting on one of Aboriginal Australia's greatest monuments and somehow tying that into a paranormal.
That's just a side. That's just a side anecdote, and I don't even know how we ended up going there first.
But I don't know how you're going to do this. But I think I'm going to buy membership just to hear that.
Look, it all leads back to an underground base that is being developed by the American military and allegedly extraterrestrials that we allegedly know is below the Blue Mountains. Apparently, it's been extended out to Goulburn, and they are using time window technology, according to Rex Gilroy, that is teleporting people from their bedrooms in the middle of the night.
I was going to say someone's been reading Rex Gilroy books today.
It's been a lot of it.
Well, today, I hope I have time. Like I said, I really want to touch on those reincarnation cases. I might do them towards the end of the show. But what I spent a lot of time on this week was this new book that's been recommended by a lot of people, actually. It's called How to Change Your Mind, What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. It's by Michael Pollan, brand new. And the reason I wanted to touch on this is because it flows into something that we had on last week's show with our guest Dean Radin, where he was discussing this change in the way that particularly science is looking at these aspects of consciousness and the true nature of reality. He mentioned that he was going to be speaking at a Merck conference, the big German pharmaceutical company. He was going to be speaking there, giving a presentation on psi to this medical giant. The fact that that was happening was just mind-blowing to us, and it really was representative of this changing paradigm in the way that these alternative views of the mind are being approached by science. So this book seems to be getting attention in that area. It's been taken seriously by scientists, and the author says that in the spring of 2010 he started to realize that hallucinogens were getting mainstream coverage. He saw this article in the New York Times headlined, "Hallucinogens Have Doctors Tuning In Again." It reported, he said, that researchers had been giving large doses of psilocybin, which is, from magic mushrooms, to terminal cancer patients as a way to help them deal with their existential distress at the approach of death. These experiments were being run simultaneously with the experiments at Johns Hopkins University, at UCLA, at New York University, and the results not only seemed improbable, he said, but they seemed crazy. Many of the volunteers reported that over the course of a single guided psychedelic journey, they had reconceived how they viewed their cancer and the prospect of dying. Several of them said that they had lost their fear of death completely. Now, over the years, we've been covering some of these studies on the show. We've been reporting on the results, and it really is mind-blowing that this anxiety before death has been completely removed. So the argument that Michael Pollan seems to be putting in place for this book is that what we're seeing is this new renaissance in psychedelic research, this second wave that is just starting to kick into gear, that is really going to tear down these old paradigms. We're starting to, like Dean Radin pointed out last week, starting to really rethink the true nature of consciousness, what it actually means, how it's how it comes into fruition and what it means about our relationship with the universe and the greater reality.
Yeah, this is truly exciting stuff, especially when it comes to, terminal illness in particular, because, the whole thing is, if someone is suffering from a terminal illness, then should we not be giving them all the tools that we have in our toolbox to alleviate the fear that would be coming? But I think from a scientific perspective, it's almost like we have an element of anxiety about death where we go, I don't know, we don't want to touch anything that has anything to do with death, we'll stay away from it. But it's so good to see that that kind of attitude is turning now.
Well, the other study he referenced was a psilocybin one. It had the headline that psilocybin can occasion mystical type experiences having substantial and sustained personal meaning and spiritual significance. This was a paper from 2006 that someone had emailed him after it had been released and he had forgotten about it.
Yeah.
And he went back to look at this, and the details were basically 30 volunteers in those small studies. They'd never before used psychedelics, but they had been given a pill containing a synthetic version of psilocybin, and other people in the study got an active placebo. Now, they then laid down on a couch. They gave them, plastic eye goggles to wear so that they couldn't see anything, and they played some music for 30 minutes. But he said what was remarkable about this study was that the participants ranked the experience as the most meaningful thing in their lives.
Really?
Like,
in half an hour?
Yeah, above finding their true love, above getting married, above the birth of their children. This 30 minutes was the most important thing in their lives.
Why?
Because of what they saw, because of what they experienced. So he went back to this study. He thought, what is going on? This study led to a series of trials at Hopkins and other universities, he says, where they started using psilocybin to treat a variety of indications, including anxiety, depression in cancer patients, addiction to nicotine is another one, addiction to alcohol, obsessive compulsive disorder, depression. They're now treating eating disorders with psychedelics. And the papers started to intrigue him because time and time again, the volunteers started describing this alternative reality, this beyond where the usual laws of physics didn't apply. And they also mentioned various manifestations of a cosmic consciousness or a divinity that would present itself to them that was unmistakably real. It wasn't some dream, it wasn't some drug experience. It was a real experience.
How do they draw a definition between what a drug experience is and what a real experience is?
Well, this is the thing. That is approached by this author, Pollan, multiple times, and most of the responses are, don't go there. That's beyond our pay grade. We're not going to answer that question. I don't want to lose my job. It's still that taboo that's surrounding it. You just don't go there yet. But for the volunteers, this is the thing. It's the volunteers' experience is 100% real because all of us have had dreams.
Absolutely.
All of us have had, horrible fever dreams and experiences like that. Maybe we've even hallucinated while we've been drunk on alcohol, but these people knew the difference. It wasn't the same thing. It was something else. And even, doctors will argue, well, look, if you have a patient that's terminally ill, they will start to hallucinate and they will have this, horrible experience as they're dying.
Oh, that's terrible.
Under medication, they'll see all sorts of things. But he says the difference in those cases is it's a horrible experience.
Yes.
It's a terrifying experience. And in the case of the psychedelic tests and him interviewing the volunteers, it's the complete opposite. So we asked this question of, was it possible that a single psychedelic experience, something that turned on nothing more than the ingestion of a pill or a square of blotter paper, could put a big dent in such a worldview? It could shift how one thought about mortality, actually change one's mind in enduring ways. Now, the author, Pollan, he maintains that he was a materialist, a realist, he says, but the idea started to take hold of him. It was like being shown a door in a familiar room, he said, and all you had to do was turn the knob and enter. Who wouldn't be curious? So the book is very detailed in its history of psychedelic research. If you want to brush up on that stuff, this is a great way to do it. second wave psychedelic research is written. People like Bob Jesse, people like Rick Doblin, Roland Griffiths, those leading this new wave, they'll be seen as the ones that really got it off the ground. These outsiders that started to take this seriously. So the early part of the book is really discussing these individuals, the people that are, at the center of these new studies that we're seeing in the headlines. He talks a lot about Bob Jesse. He was this computer scientist. He was an engineer for Oracle. And his curiosity about psychedelics, he said, first got peaked during this drug education unit in high school. And this particular class of drugs, they mentioned, the psychedelics, wasn't psychologically addictive. They weren't physically addictive. And then when his teacher was describing the effects, he talked about shifts in consciousness, shifts in visual perception. And Jesse, as a teenager, he found this intriguing. He's like, I could sense that there was something they weren't telling us. It's like, if it's not physically addictive, if it's not mentally addictive, and it's not necessarily dangerous, what's the big deal? Why is it a banned substance?
That's actually a really good question that I hadn't considered before. If it's not addictive, and it's not harmful, maybe they're worried about the risk of overdose, because it's quite easy. Very small dosages of LSD can lead to overdose, right? It's only a certain amount.
No.
You can't overdose on it.
No, you can't. No one's overdosed on LSD.
No, they have, I'm sure. I've got to look into it. I'm sure there's a story of a drug investigator who once accidentally had it poured over his skin or something, and that was, I think, one of the only recorded cases in history of a guy that had an overdose.
I might be wrong then, but the author does make that claim. I'm pretty sure, I haven't got it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure he says that he couldn't find a case where someone had died from an overdose.
Maybe it's about vehicles then? Maybe they don't want people driving under the influence?
He actually looks into this. When you actually look at the stats, the medical room visits, emergency room visits, because of the use of psychedelics, are so low. It's
Probably a lot less than alcohol.
Oh, it doesn't even register. So even as a teenager, he's like, something's not right. Like, something's up with this. He just made a mental note of it. And in his 20s, he started working for Bell Labs, and he fell in with a group of friends in Baltimore who decided to experiment with psychedelics. So he had his own personal experience. It was during one of these Saturday afternoon experiments where the 25-year-old Bill Jesse, having ingested a high dose of LSD, had this powerful non-dual experience that would be transformative.
What's a non-dual experience?
Well, the author was wondering that as well and asked him to describe it. And he said, look, I was lying on my back underneath this ficus tree. And he said, I knew it was going to be a strong experience. And the point came where the little I, his ego, was starting to slip away. I lost all awareness of being on the floor in an apartment in Baltimore and could no longer tell if my eyes were open unsure is this immense shift. He can't be certain that consciousness is created by the brain now. So, at this point in the book, there's a really important point made by the author, Michael Pollan. He puts forward this question. He says, here's what I don't get about that kind of experience. Why in the world would you ever give it credit at all? He said, I didn't understand why you wouldn't simply file it under this interesting dream or a drug-induced fantasy. He says, the conviction that some profound objective truth has been disclosed to you, though, is the hallmark of this mystical experience, regardless of whether it's been occasioned by drug, meditation, fasting, or some kind of sensory deprivation. There's actually this term for it, coined by William James. He called it the noetic quality. People feel like they've been let in on this deep secret of the universe, and they can't be shaken from this conviction. See, dreams can't stand that test either. Right. So we've heard this term before, described as gnosis as well. This
yes. Yep. See, Dean Radin addressed this in his book last week as well, where he was talking about the fact that these experiences, even though they're overwhelming as well, people are subjected to the psychological term of repression. So they've had this experience. It's real. It feels real than real what's occurring here. But for some reason, because you come back into this existence, this reality, you tend to go, oh, no, not now. You kind of step away from it after a while, and you start. So I can see where he's kind of gone. He's had all these experiences, and in the time they felt real, but he's kind of stepped back and gone, oh, well, I'm not going to cross that line.
Well, this is just the author saying this. He's questioning this, but for the people that have the experiences, this is what they feel. They feel this gnosis. It has this noetic quality. Yeah. It's the feeling that,
it's a universal
like you said,
knowing.
you're let in on this deep secret. It can't possibly be anything but true because you just have this internal knowing that it's real.
You know where else you commonly hear that is in a lot of near-death experiences.
Absolutely.
The number of near-death experiences you hear someone come back and say, I no longer fear death.
Yeah, and as Pollan, the author, is tackling this, he says the most straightforward and yet hardest to accept explanation is that it is simply true. The altered state of consciousness has opened the person up to a truth that the rest of us, imprisoned in this ordinary waking consciousness, simply can't see. We can't experience it.
Who was it that referred to this reality as being a prison as well? Was that some of the work of Graham Hancock? Was he kind of describing that we are stuck in this prism of a paradigm?
I think you're thinking of the Wachowski brothers. Yes.
No,
I mean, it's a trope. It's a trope, though. It's a trope in religion, in spiritualism, in New Age quackery.
It's like there is no spoon. You're right.
It's like this where we are in this prison. I mean, but I think it's true as well. I think this material world is this filter from this greater reality. We can't see beyond it.
But then why? I mean, just from what would be the point? Like, why are we here?
Way above my pay grade.
Okay, right.
So he starts talking about how the experiences in a lot of these studies now, I mean, they're anecdotal reports. So in effect, it's got no value. Like, science has little interest in and tolerance for the testimony of the individual. So this is an important point. There's a certain limit to how far our materialist science can take these kinds of experiences. But Bob Jesse from here, he started this organization called CSP, the Council on Spiritual Practices. He started to get in touch with the researchers from the 1950s, 1960s, who were still around, but because these substances had been stated as class 1 scheduled banned drugs, obviously they couldn't do any more research. But he got in touch with James Fadiman, this former Stanford guy who was doing research on psychedelics and problem solving. There was Miron Stolaroff, this Silicon Valley engineer who switched to psychedelic research after having an LSD trip. A lot of people in technical fields, like computer scientists, they'll take some kind of crazy mushroom and then switch to doing psychedelic research.
Yeah, I have noticed that. I wonder why.
Well, it seems to open up all the possibilities. There was Sasha Shulgin he got in touch with before he died. Remember the famous chemist we've covered him multiple times on the show, of course, who synthesized MDMA after it had been forgotten by Merck in 1912.
Does Merck still own the patent on that?
I don't know if it's expired.
Because that would be interesting if Radin's talking at a Merck conference and they own patents on hallucinogenic substances.
Yeah, right. It is a strange connection. But as he started to unearth this first wave of research, he realized that a lot of it had been lost to science. There's so much there. There's Before 1965, you've got over 1,000 scientific papers on over 40,000 research subjects. But most of it's kind of hidden away. You have to try really hard to dig this stuff up. And the thing that started to interest him the most was the research on the potential of psychedelics to contribute to the betterment of people that were already well, not necessarily helping people that, you know, had mental problems or was suffering from depression or anxiety, but just normal everyday people. So he starts talking about a series of experiments that were done in 1962. They called these the Good Friday experiments. And they did these at Marsh Chapel in California. It was done by Walter Punky, this psychiatrist and minister. He was doing a PhD at Harvard, and he's working with Timothy Leary as well. And they did this double-blind experiment where they got 20 divinity students and gave them a capsule of white powder on a Good Friday service at the chapel. And
Probably not a good idea to be high in church.
so these 20 students, 10 of them got a placebo, and the other 10 got some
Tripping balls.
kick-ass LSD. So once the session starts, once the service starts, you could tell who had got the placebo because they're all sitting on the pews, you know, straight backed, being very conservative. And the other 10 were just roaming around the church, looking up at the ceiling, talking to things that weren't there,
Feeling the curtains.
and basically having this incredible mystical experience with God. Now, what's interesting, because a lot of these studies from the 1960s, they had these amazing so-called results, but what later researchers found out, researchers like Rick Doblin, who went back in 1986 and did a follow-up study on these participants, he realized that because in the 60s everyone was so overhyped about the potential of this research, a lot of their experiment designs weren't the best.
In what way?
And they would kind of cover up things that went wrong.
Okay.
So he found out that in these Good Friday experiments, most of the people reported, again, that it was the most meaningful moment in their lives. It reshaped their entire existence, but he found all these flaws. The original researchers failed to mention that some of the subjects had acute anxiety during the experience, and they thought that they were going to die.
That happens. I mean, you commonly hear that in people that take drugs recreation, you know, they do it anyway. It happens.
One had to be restrained and given a Thorazine injection
Oh dear.
after he ran out of the church screaming up the street that the Messiah was coming. I don't know if he was naked or not. Maybe.
We'll go with that.
So part of that is because they weren't told what they were getting. Like if you just...
Oh, they didn't know.
Yeah, they didn't know.
Oh, so it would seem real.
Like if you're just going to church and you think, okay, there's an experimental drug, but whatever.
You
They
think it's
don't
aspirin.
know that it's LSD.
No.
Right?
No.
And then they start seeing and conversing with God. Of course, some people are going to get a little bit worried.
Okay, so hence probably what you're talking about, this experiment not being designed very well.
Yeah, so in this second wave of experiments, in the new experiments, the setting and the assistance is always part of the design, and it's very specifically set up to avoid and help the psychonaut get past this anxiety, which is generally a part of the experience at first. There's a certain threshold that needs to be passed to get over this initial anxiety.
That happens with a number of psychoactive drugs. I believe it's both from a psychological point of view and a physiological point of view. For example, people that have taken MDMA report that before the high comes on, they actually get a wave of nausea and they feel, you know, uncomfortable, and then it kicks in. It seems to be the same with LSD and other similar substances.
Let me take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to look at some of the results of this new wave of experiments, some of the experiments that have been done in the last 10 years. And you're going to hear about some interviews with the participants, including meeting the discombobulated head of Osama bin Laden and giving birth to Michelle Obama. That's coming up on Mysterious Universe. Stay with us. Roland Griffiths, for example, will drop by the session, and there's a certain, it's almost like the pre-launch prep they go to with the volunteer.
Right.
They'll actually sit down with them and say, look, you've got to think of yourself as an astronaut being blasted into space. You're going way out there, and you need to take it all in and engage with whatever you find there. But you can be confident that we'll be here keeping an eye on things for you. Think of us as ground control, he says. We've got you covered.
See, that's the same thing that happens with ayahuasca experiences. So there's a guide, it's like a ritual to it. And that's why, maybe that's part of the reason why these drugs have been outlawed. I'm not saying it is, but maybe when people take them by themselves, in a depressed state, in a dark room, they have really bad reactions to them. Maybe that's the harm index they're referring to.
Well, the harm index comes when you're just out in the traffic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there's nothing, no kind of context, no one guiding the experience, no safe environment. That's when it gets really dangerous. But you see that this advice is really helpful when you hear from the volunteers, because they describe holding on for dear life as they feel their sense of self disintegrating. Brian Turner, for example, one of his first-time journeys, he's this 44-year-old physicist, military contracting guy. He said, I could feel my body dissolving, beginning with my feet, until it all disappeared, but the left side of my jaw, that was the last part of him left, just this little piece of his jaw, and then that started disintegrating, and he started to flip out. He's like, if I knew that that part of my jaw disappeared, there'd be nothing of me left. And as this is happening, he remembers the words that he had received before he took the LSD, which was, instead of being afraid, you've got to face it. If you encounter anything scary, just go towards it. So immediately, instead of being afraid of dying, he said, I got curious about what was going on. And the whole situation dissolved into this pleasant, floaty feeling, and he became one with the music. And all of a sudden, the room he finds himself in transforms into this large cave. And there's all these icicles coming down from the ceiling of this cave. And the icicles are all the past relationships he's had in this life. And as he examines each icicle, it's like a little mini life review with whatever person that was. So it might be, it's like everyone in this giant cave. It could be some guy he sat next to in 3rd grade math class, and he'll look at this icicle and he'll have an entire review of the relationship he had with this person. And it's this really weird kind of mini life review encased in each icicle of ice. And he said it was really cool. I remembered everything about the relationship. It was this review. Something about the trajectory of my life was being explained, and all of these people had made me who I was today. And this is where we start to get some of the replaced with this feeling of freedom and interconnectedness. It was this huge transformation, and she said, I saw that I can name and admit a feeling. I can confess it to someone, and I would be able to let it go. And I came out a little older and wiser, and I can now do this for myself.
So what was that experience, though? Was that to try and get her past something that she was struggling with in this life?
Well, again, because this is a book for mainstream science, that is conveniently not addressed.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
But, I mean, we've covered plenty of work from people like Stanislav Grof, who have explored these kinds of past life memories, past life deaths showing up under the influence of LSD. I mean, that is one explanation. It could just be a transformed thing for her to experience. But I like that the scientist, in that moment, he's